Thanks, Kara. So, really, when we think about inland passenger rail, when we think about passenger rail in Maine, which is what we're going to talk about today, if you guys want to go ahead and load up the very first one. So Rhiannon will be here in a moment. She's going to talk about USDA erode. And we're going to try and have a conversation about passenger rail that really focuses on, I think, the why and allows for some dialogue and some interaction. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is because there probably needs to be a reset around how we talk about passenger rail, and in particular passenger rail going into parts of Maine other than areas that are currently served in Cumberland, primarily Cumberland County and York County. So I guess maybe one of the first places to start, without getting into my background on it or anything like that, how many people have taken the Downeaster between Portland or Brunswick and Boston at least once? Great. Okay. So there's a familiarity with the fact that there is passenger rail service currently in Maine, and that service returned, if you will, in December of 2001, after we had had an absence of passenger rail service between Portland and Boston since very roughly 1965. So I guess the second part of the question, or another sort of way of looking at it, how many people think the Downeaster is quote unquote commuter rail? And commuter, is the Downeaster a commuter service? Okay, a few hands are going up. And how many people would say that Downeaster is intercity passenger rail? Okay, a lot more hands. The answer is it's both. And it is both for a couple of specific reasons. The first reason it's both commuter rail and intercity passenger is because it's a high frequency service. It runs more than just once a day or twice a day between its two primary endpoints. So the Downeaster has 5 round trips a day. The second reason you can say that the Downeaster is quote-unquote commuter rail is because it actually gets some funding from the Federal Transit Administration for the purposes of providing transit services between one point and another for people transiting to work and on a frequent basis. So that's one of the other reasons why the Downeaster offers passes. You buy a commuter pass on the Downeaster. Some of those types of provisions are related to the fact that they get FTA funding. Okay, so the next question would be, or I guess the next point that I would make is when we hear all these different phrases tossed around, oh, it should be commuter rail, or it should be light rail, or it should be passenger rail, it should be all these different things. Those can have significance to funding, and they can have significance to destinations, and they can have significance to frequency, okay? And when conversations about passenger rail come up, they often can have a lot of emotion, and what are we going to do, and why are we doing it, okay? So I guess I'd like to hear maybe, we'll have some folks coming in here, but can anybody just throw it out, why do you think we should have passenger rail? If that's what you want, why do you think we should have passenger rail? Just, yes. Fewer cars on the road, congestion mitigation, lower carbon footprint, okay? Environmental.
Fight sprawl.
Fighting sprawl, more affordable, more comfortable, okay? More equitable, potentially. So I would offer to you that those are all good reasons, but the most compelling reason why you want to have passenger rail in Maine is because it allows you to do much higher intensity of use of your built environment. That's why. Because we have cities that need the ability to move people back and forth in high volume without having to provide huge highways right into the middle of the city. So all the other points are all true. And I would add, by the way, one that didn't come up, passenger rail is probably the single most accessible form of transportation that there is. It's easily the most wheelchair-friendly form of transportation. It's also very senior-friendly, and because you have staff on the train that can help provide, you know, individuals who may have frailties or disabilities for whatever reason. You can move people in that mode more easily than you can necessarily in other modes. And here we go. So then the next piece that I wanted to maybe get to, but I'm going to introduce our other speaker. Just arriving off the bus from Madison, Rhiannon Hampson, State Director for USDA erode.
Thank you, George. Yes, so we were just at Timber HP and housing, pretty fantastic, thinking about that kind of economic development and revitalization, which I feel like is my perfect afternoon segue into our conversation. So I'll turn it back over to you because I don't want to just like hop in and actually not know what we were talking about yet. I'm going to do that thing where I like catch up by listening and nodding along thoughtfully. But I appreciate it, and I'm so excited to be able to have the chance to be a part of this conversation.
Awesome. So we're just talking about, you know, why passenger rail and what its uses are. A little bit of discussion on the environment. Okay. So now, how many people live closer to the coast? Like, if you live east of I-95, around Route 1, you know, but you're generally closer to the coast, you know, up through Penobscot, not Penobscot, but you know, Camden, Route 1, all that. Live near the coast. There we go. Okay. And how many people live like more in the inland side, like if you're on the Maine Turnpike, I-95, Lewiston, Auburn, Augusta, Waterville, Bangor, that kind of stuff. And there we go. Okay. So right now we have a lot of service for passenger rail and bus between you know, southern Maine, points in southern Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, but especially Portland, New Brunswick. There's a lot of service there. And one of the discussion points on passenger rail, in particular this past couple of years, has been the possibility of either extending the Downeaster out to Rockland or doing some type of service towards Rockland. I'm going to ask some key questions here, maybe give you some perspective. What is the best reason to do any kind of passenger rail to or from Rockland? Tourism is one, yes? Congestion? Yep. Okay. I would offer, in my opinion, congestion on Route 1 is the reason to have some type of passenger rail. Now, what is the driver of congestion on Route 1 to or from Rockland through Wiscasset and what have you? What is the primary driver of congestion other than tourists coming from out of state?
Red seats.
Hot dogs? Yes. Hot dogs? What's that? Construction, maybe? It's something that happens every day.
Working.
Yes, who said BNW? You win. In my opinion, the entry and exit of first shift from the yard is the reason why there's congestion on Route 1. And what that means is if you are going to try to use the railroad to address congestion, you probably should be looking at an option that is really going to be focused on serving Bath. Minnie Reynolds from Bath. And the reason why is because, yes, you can do things that will help tourism, and you can bring in economic development and all that. We know the Mid-Coast actually is quite prosperous, but if you are looking at that particular segment of rail, and that's what we want to do, and you want to do something that's meaningful to transit or transportation, I would offer to you, having looked at this question for a long, long time, people should be talking about how do we handle 7,000 employees coming into or out of the city of Bath and the town of Brunswick every single day, Monday through Friday, and sometimes on weekends if they're working weekends on catch-up work or whatever, plus, you know, all the other demands associated with that. How do we handle that? So if you are adding passenger rail for tourism, you might be adding just more people into a place that's already very congested. If you're adding capacity that addresses the needs of Bath Ironworks, you will take vehicles off the road. No doubt about it, you will. There's no question you will do it. And not only that, you may help Bath Iron Works be more productive. Because there are times of the year when Route 1 is very, very difficult to drive at 5 o'clock in the morning when they're headed in. It's icy, it's wintry, nobody wants to be on it. And in that situation, you do have shift workers who will say, I'm not going in today, it's too dangerous. Rail is an all-weather mode of transportation. It can handle those kinds of things better than somebody who's driving. So that's roughly where we are to this point. Your slide will be next on. Got it. Okay, so that's maybe a discussion on the Rockland segment. How many people had thought of I mean, I guess we already know there weren't a lot of hands on that, but I just want to offer you that perspective because I think that's something that doesn't come up very much. Now, how many people understand the geography of the railroad in Maine and specifically the idea that there's one line that goes north from Brunswick and goes to Augusta, and there's a different line that goes a different way and goes to Lewiston. Is everybody kind of aware of that? There's a fork, right? And everybody understands that that fork has been there for how long? Ever since the railroad was built. Ever since it was built. That's been the way it was, okay? Now, the thing that's different today from about 1850 is we have roads. And one of the problems with understanding passenger rail development in Maine and how we're going to address this issue that constantly comes up is, well, if we go one way, we won't go through Augusta. And I would offer you this thought. How many people have ever been out on Route 27? If you go out past the turnpike and the highway, and you're headed north towards Farmington and Belleville, how many people have been out that segment? Perfect. Okay, how many people know where Hammond Lumber is? Okay, Hammond Lumber. So in Belgrade, on Route 27, is Hammond Lumber. And how many people remember or recall or are aware that there's a railroad crossing in Hammond Lumber? Okay. This is the big secret. Here you go. You're going to walk out of this today, and you're going to know something that you didn't know. One of the problems with passenger rail service to Augusta is the station option that's obvious in Augusta is, it's either downtown, maybe it's on the Statler Tissue side of the Kennebec River or whatever. That site in Belgrade, Route 27, is on the same rail line that goes through Lewiston, and it's on the same rail line that goes to Waterville. There are places in the city of Augusta where if you are driving to catch a train, let's say, hypothetically speaking, and you go to Hammond Lumber, your drive time is shorter than if you had to drive to Drumbarker Lane on the east side of the Kennebec, which is the former Statler Tissue site, or even if you had to drive down to Front Street, I think in Augusta, is right next to the railroad. That is not something that's particularly well understood. But why does it matter? It matters because if you solve the problem of how do I serve all the cities in Maine using a single rail line north of Brunswick, you're done. Now you have political consensus. And the problem that we don't have, the problem that we have had as an issue in the past few years, there is not a political consensus on how to do passenger rail north of either Brunswick or Portland. Nobody knows what to do. Everybody's going in every single different direction. Constantly see proposals. I will tell you right now, the way you do it is you take an active rail line, which exists, Lewiston, Auburn, Winthrop. Yes, I live there. Waterville, and you serve Augusta and Belgrade and Hammond Lumber. That's it. Now you have a single rail line that can serve all of Maine. I offer to you right now, if those cities, Bangor, Waterville, Augusta, Lewiston, Auburn, all decide that they want service on that line, it stops being a question of studies, and it stops being a question of money, and it starts being a question of people saying, this is what we want, this is the future, because it's not the future in 10 years, it's the future for the next 100 years, because we want our cities to have people in them. And you will tell the legislature, and you will tell the agencies, this is what we're going to do. Go find the money. And they will go find the money, because there's a lot of it out there right now. And if they have to figure out bonds, they'll figure out bonds. But it can be done. And I want everybody in here to know right now, if you leave here knowing nothing else, there is a way to do it. There absolutely is a way to do it. That's probably the most important thing you can learn today. Want to talk about?
Well, I mean, I feel like you just told everyone how to do it, George. So, I think, do I have a slide? Okay, do I have a slide? Oh, fabulous. Okay, great. So the slide that doesn't have my face on it is probably, I learned a thing yesterday. What was that? A hood ornament? Which was sort of like the face of an agency. So while I'm waiting for that one to come up, so Rhiannon Hampson, I'm the state director of USDA Rural Development. I also have a dairy and livestock farm on Route 1 in Mid-Coast, Maine. Thank you. You can imagine how fun that is in the summertime when we have 18-wheelers of grain trying to get to deliver to our working farm. And there are a lot of people who are really excited to either get to Red Seeds the other direction or head to Acadia. Because as the superintendent of Acadia was always reminding us, we are 1 day's drive here in Maine from 80 million people. 80 million people can get to Maine in less than 24 hours, which is possibly a terrifying thought. But from an economic development and a social development standpoint, it's actually kind of exciting, right? We have 1.3 million people in this state. We're the most rural state in the nation, according to the census. My colleagues in Montana frequently get a little upset when I say that because they feel really rural. But the fact is, we're just real spread out. And so we have the most rural population. So in terms of why is rural development, USDA rural development, even involved in this conversation, right? We're not transportation. I'm not Pete Buttigieg. I'm not up here like making rail service happen. But we do engage in rural placemaking. So on the slide behind me, you can see kind of all of the things that we do. We operate out of 3 big buckets. I tell everyone that we're actually the Gen X of federal agencies. Nobody really knows what we're up to. We just like go home and do all the dishes and get everything done by ourselves as latchkey kids. But really, we're working behind the scenes in a myriad of ways, engaged in this kind of concept of rural placemaking. So we do renewable energy, we do standard energy, we do housing, we do small business development, we do rural business development grants to Main Street Skowhegan. We build incubators and community kitchens and fire stations and all of these things. So rural placemaking is sort of the foundation for our interest in the idea of rural rail passenger service to rural spaces, right? The other thing is, I absolutely just love it. I was in my early 20s and I had an AmeriPass. I don't know if anyone is sort of old enough to know what that is, but for a month, I just rode trains all over the country. John is laughing, because I think he remembers that moment. You can get on and off wherever you feel like it. For a whole month, you can spend the night in a train station and like hope that you get a lottery ticket to get upgraded to a sleeper car. 20-something years later, we tried to replicate that trip for my daughter's graduation. We did go across country on a train, and I can tell you I fit better in one of those little sleeper bunks a lot, like a couple decades ago. I was better at that. So I'm also thinking of this from that rural placemaking space, sort of a social equity point of view, right? So there are a lot of people in Maine. We're one of the oldest populations in the country. There are a lot of people who have had to give up driving, especially in icy, bad conditions. There are a lot of people here, thanks to the consent decree, many years ago, several decades ago, who actually are entitled to, they have the right to, live and have community-based access. So a lot of our folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities no longer are housed in group spaces, right? They have the right to live in their community and access community-based services. They don't always drive. Having access to a vehicle is kind of an equity issue, especially right now when we're looking at prices and that kind of thing going through the roof. So the equity of access to those spaces is actually a critical part of what we're doing. Follow me down this rabbit hole. So then I want to tie in all of our environmental goals. So we have a lot of environmental goals, which we are now also thoughtfully rooting in the idea of justice and social justice. So how are we not disenfranchising these people? How are we mitigating the fact that, and I'm looking at Sarah Curran's here, she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I did learn this from her at the Climate Council. 54% of all of the greenhouse gas emissions in Maine are coming from our transportation sector. That ties back into the fact that we're the most rural state in the country, I grew up somewhere where, I had to drive 2 hours to buy a pair of socks. That is just true. If you're in Machias and you need some socks in 1994, you had to drive at least to Ellsworth and back, so 3 hours. So the idea of that kind of placemaking, we're looking at economic development, we're looking at social diversity and inclusion by being able to bring more and different and new people into these communities. Atrophy is not good from a social perspective in some of our most rural spaces. That innovation that we need in order to sustain our schools and our small businesses and community centers all comes from actual access to those places. And I can tell you that a lot of my friends, when they do come here and try to rent a car, coming from really urban spaces, did not grow up driving on our back roads. And they don't really know how to do it. Some of them actually don't even really have licenses. So when we're thinking about those 80 million people who are one day's drive from here, we also have to consider the fact that if they're coming from urban spaces, they might not be comfortable driving on all of our back roads. And so in addition to making those investments, and we're doing so really through bipartisan infrastructure law, it's a really fantastic, wonderful way for us to put much needed money into our roads. I have agreed, I made a personal agreement with myself last year that I would not complain when I was stuck in traffic, and I have not done so. Maybe a little, but not a lot. I'm really grateful for that kind of road work that's happening. They are actually literally redoing road beds for the first time in decades, and I love it. But that's not enough. That's not going to be enough to make sure that we're an inclusive and welcoming space for everyone who wants to be here, for everyone who deserves to be here, frankly, for everyone who we need to be here. Because again, oldest population, 1.3 million people, we need warm bodies. And one of the only ways I think that we're going to be able to get there is to diversify the opportunity for transportation and for navigating some of our most rural spaces. How's that? I think that's it. Do I have more slides? Yeah, let's do it. Let's take questions or thoughts. Who else has traveled around the country on a train? Does anyone feel? Yes, yes, my people. There we go.
Yes, sir. So there is active rail service on those tracks that's currently for freight. However, that does not by any stretch of the imagination mean that it is properly engineered for use by passenger rail service. One of the problems in the dialogue that happens publicly, what is talk about, is that one of the problems that happens with dialogue about passenger rail is everybody has their preferred line. Everybody says, oh, we should do it this way because it goes to Yarmouth this way. And oh, it should go this way because this way we connect Brunswick directly. And oh, it should go this way because it'll go through downtown Augusta. My answer to you is very simple. If you want to be successful, you have to reuse an active line. If the line is not currently actively in use for freight rail service, forget about it. It's not there, pretend like you never saw it. It doesn't count. I don't care if the state owns it. The financial case for we can just upgrade a line that doesn't currently have freight rail service runs into massive barriers associated with return on investment and the ability to be able to say, hey, this line has dual use. That's one of the most critical things of all. More questions?
Hold on.
How do you incentivize people to want to take public transportation? Because that can also be a taboo, like, oh, it's dirty, oh, it's whatever. I took Metro Breeze from Brunswick to Portland, and I love it because there's Wi-Fi and everything. But how do you get people who want, the American that feels like freedom and liberty to do whatever I want for whatever I want? How does that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll say around this first. So my background is actually in social science, right? Because I think people's behavior is somewhat fascinating, and it ties in really well to what we're doing here. And I think it's going to be a sea change. Honestly, my daughter lives in Bangor, and she prides herself on riding the bus absolutely everywhere she possibly can, no matter what, because she wants people to see her riding the bus everywhere she can, no matter what. She wants other 19-year-old people to know that riding the bus is kind of fun, maybe a little bit exciting for someone from rural Maine. You can see things on the bus that you possibly weren't going to. But again, it creates that sort of, there's not a lot of cultural diversity here for young people or for any of us. But it offers an opportunity to engage with people whom you otherwise wouldn't. So that is sort of a cultural moment that we're going to have to drive. That's going to take innovators. Honestly, it's just going to take people in each community to be out there being an example for their peers and doing it themselves. In a very easy, privileged, overworked, tired mom way, I try to do this as often as I can. I refuse to drive into Boston. I will not do it. I hate driving into Boston. I always hated driving into Boston. And so now I drive to Brunswick, and I park my car, and I get on the train, and I go to Boston. And I make sure that everything that I'm doing in Boston or beyond happens around that train schedule. And that I tell everyone I can that that's how I'm doing it, right? We just have to be active and do it.
One thought to that, because this is so important to answering your question. Right, the question was, it's the American ideal, right? How is that true in Philadelphia where they take the subway every day? Or how is that true in Boston? Or how is that true in New York? Or how is that true in Washington, D.C.? Or how is that true in any other large city in the United States, right? So I would offer to you, well, there is a cultural issue, but the cultural issue is not really our nation. Maine has a cultural attachment, understandably, to motor vehicle and automobile and personal automobile use for many good reasons. But 100 years ago, we had a lot of rail service and it was culturally normative here. Most of us who perhaps have ancestors or people who lived here previously, or third, fourth generation Mainers, it's very likely you have grandparents or great-grandparents who used railroad service and it was just as normal to them as breathing. It was just normal. That's how you do it. You want to go to Portland, we take the train. Not everybody, even before that, in Rumford, we had a stagecoach, and that's how they got to the rail line in Bethel. Josh.
Hold on.
George knows this because he was heavily involved in the advocacy around 1559 and strengthening the Public Transit Advisory Council. But consistently what we heard throughout the course of that process was transit doesn't work in rural areas, transit won't work for Maine. And I think it's so important that as advocates we flip that on its head and say, why are you telling us in rural areas that we don't deserve transit, And that reorientation was really effective throughout parts of that conversation. And I just want to underscore that it's not about it won't work. It has worked. We deserve to have it again.
And I would offer this too. Route 1 corridor going up the coast is technically in a rural part of Maine. They have intercity bus service, but the Route 2 corridor going through here and Rumford has no intercity bus service from Rumford Coach. None. We have none. Not one a day, not 1 week, not one a month, not one a year. We have none. Year after year after year after year. Okay? That is a policy choice that is being made through our budgeting process. Fundamentally by the legislature. It's not really the agencies. The legislature can tell them, here's the money, go do it. And many people will say you need to do a study, whatever, I get it. But just think about that.
We got time for a couple more questions, and hands going up everywhere. This gentleman had his hand up.
I just wanted, last year in the legislature, it was from the LD 60, $20,000 was all Maine had to put in to apply for a $5 million grant for exactly the route you're talking about. And it was defeated by Democrats in the House. And I don't know how we overcome that, and a lot of them were from that coastal area.
So I would posit too that it's a very nonpartisan issue, and clearly when they're voting on certain things, right, partisan alignment comes into play. But it is a nonpartisan issue, and I think one of the ways that we're going to get traction, and to Josh's point, one of the ways that we're going to get traction is to remind people whose issue this really is, right? This is an elder population issue, this is an aging in place issue, this is a disability rights issue, this is an issue for, again, rural economic development, distressed communities, which Maine, has many of, by our own USDA index. So trying to make this discussion as inclusive as possible, make sure that those representatives are seeing their constituents as stakeholder groups that are part of this discussion, that is actually where we'll get traction, right? We take it right out of the partisan arena right then. It does not become about the amount of money on the appropriations budget line. It becomes about who is pushing, who is going to carry this water, who is pushing for this to happen. And again, we need to sort of root this in that idea of justice and economic and climate justice as well. So.
Okay, I've got one more question back here, and then my suggestion would be that if you have any further questions, the information is up there on the slides. You'll also be getting a copy of everyone's slides. So it'd be a good conversation to continue on having after this session.
And before we take that question, I will be happy to take more questions after this, but I'm not going to do it in here. I'll go outside.
Thank you, George.
Hi there. Are there any discussions around using erode to connect passengers from Maine or other parts of Bangor with regional streams in Canada, and vice versa, to our Canadian neighbors to visit us?
That's come up many times. I would offer, again, the spectrum of what you see for ideas around rail is really, really wide. You see discussions about service to Montreal. You see discussions about, we wish the Canadians would start running that train that used to go through Jackman and Greenville and Brownville Junction and through Washington County and all that kind of stuff. 4 places that really need service: Bangor, Waterville, Augusta, Lewiston. That's it. That's the entire dialogue should revolve around that and build out from there. Why? Because those are the communities that have the political capital necessary to tell the legislature that this is what they want. And those communities are not on the same sheet of music right now. They're not even close. Some of them say we don't care. Some of them say we want it. Some of them aren't really sure. But I can tell you right now, we've gone as far as we can with highways. We have pretty good highways, better than most people realize. They're not perfect. Maine DOT needs a lot more money for a lot of paving. I could see plenty more paving in the Rumford area, all day long. We'd further with it. But in terms of how we're going to help our cities grow, which is how our cities are then going to provide development pressure onto our small towns, we've probably gone as far as we can. We have a fantastic highway with the turnpike. And 295 really isn't that bad, okay? I understand we all laugh about it, but I drove to North Carolina for Thanksgiving last year. Good luck in Connecticut, people, okay? It's just really important, I think, to remember that and to think about it. And I think the last thing I would say is, in Rumford, we see development pressure from Lewiston, Auburn, immediately. If something happens in Lewiston that causes them to grow, it's not 5 years down the line, we'll see it. We see it within months, and typically within that year.
Yeah, I would just finish with, again, coalition building, right? Look around and start talking to your neighbors and folks in events like this, where we're getting out of our silos and we're finding that sort of Venn diagram, that social Venn diagram, where the people we're trying to help and the problems we're trying to solve are all coming back to sort of the same place. That is why I love rural placemaking, the idea of that, despite that being a little bit catchphrasy right now. I don't know, are the kids, if the kids aren't saying it, I guess I can. So then it's still right? But the idea of that is very real, right? Again, inclusivity, impact, benefit, coalition building, these are the things that have to happen in order for us to be able to really sort of change the narrative.
Thank you.
Thank you.